Hi friends, welcome to the greatest fall vegetable garden video ever in the history of fall vegetable garden videos. Of course I say this somewhat jokingly, but to me it really is the best video because it's my vegetable garden and it's the best fall I've ever had. My garden is 40 feet by 40 feet or 1,600 square feet and I'm located in Southern California. Back here by my garden I have two African pygmy goat pets, Alice and Charlotte. I nourish my soil, it gives me nutrient-rich food, and the whole place is very zen for my soul. So I'm grateful for this opportunity to share my fall with you. Kick back and enjoy. Let's do this one chronologically and go back to the end of summer, beginning of fall, when my dahlias in the west corner of my garden were really blooming. Back here in my north quadrant, through the summertime, I grew a couple varieties of sunflower and a couple varieties of popcorn, but those have been harvested, so it's time to pull up all the stalk stumps and roots and remaining husks to get the area ready for replanting for a fall crop. I call this familiar dance in the garden out with the old and in with the new, and it has to be done every time something's been harvested and we prepare that space for a new crop. Now, of course, all this organic material is going to get composted back into the garden. Tall stalks get ground up in my wood chipper, and all the smaller material gets put into my compost bins. In this case, my goats ate most of the corn leaves. Of course, I have to move all the old irrigation lines out of the way before I prepare the ground. After clearing the space of old plants, roots, and stalks, I like to spread a layer of my homemade compost around the area. The compost that I make on my property is from the organic material that I would otherwise be putting in my green garbage bin. I'll spend more time discussing it later, but let's just say that it does add a nice layer of organic material and earthworms, which will help enrich the soil. Here I'm using one of my favorite garden tools called a broad fork. Now I use it instead of a tiller because it's less pulverizing to the soil, won't chop up all the microorganisms and earthworms I work so hard to accumulate, but it does loosen up the ground, makes for better water penetration, and air into the soil, which of course is essential for all that life. Oh yeah, and using a broad fork, it's great exercise too. After a pass with a broad fork, I can see earthworms actually falling into the cracks and holes that were made in the ground, and I'm sure they'll be spreading their nutrients and castings, enriching my soil. It's a lot of work, but at last, this 20-foot by 20-foot plot is ready for planting. Here I've spread a few rows of store-bought amend or compost, which usually contains materials I don't have in my own compost. Perhaps it's chicken or cow manure or other nutrients that they've added. Of course, I only use the organic stuff. Now in this row, I planted 3 varieties of carrots. One was a mixed bag of orange carrot seeds. One was a kind of unique purple variety from India. But the third variety I planted is my favorite, and that's because I grew out the seeds. They're dragon carrots. They're actually purple on the outside and orange on the inside. Carrot seed take 2 years to produce because the plant is biennial. It's 1 year for the carrot itself, and it's in the second year that it gives you the flowers or umbels, which are where the seeds come from. In the second row, I planted Texas white sweet onions, also from seeds that I grew out. Just need to add that ingredient of life, water, and be patient. Hey friend, today is October 2nd, and I'm standing in my pepper patch because I've harvested some of my crazy hot peppers. some of those million-plus Scoville peppers that I think are basically more like weapons than food. But finally, some of those have been ready to harvest. I have a plate of 7 Pot Douglas that I'm going to cut up, take the seeds so that I can grow some more next year, and then dry out the pods. So let me just show you down where I'm standing my Trinidad Scorpion, my Ghost Pepper, and my 7 Pot Dougla, those hottest peppers, and some of the pods that are hanging on them. Now again, I've taken off most of the Dougla peppers, but hopefully you can see that I've still got some more pods that weren't 100% ripe that I'm leaving on the plant to fully ripen. Right next to that one, and it's a tight little situation, I've got my Trinidad Scorpions. So you can see also these are close but not 100% ripe. So I'm letting those finish off. And lastly over here, the Ghost Peppers. These are not quite near ripe, but maybe you can see down in here some that are getting close, and I've harvested a few as well. So these are the hottest pepper among my about 60 plants. And let's go over and take a look at some of those Douglas. All right, so here's my plate of the 7 Pot Douglas. This million-plus Scoville pepper gets its name because the 7 Pot, they say, it's hot enough to heat 7 pots of chili, just one pepper. And a Dougla in this Trinidad region where the pepper comes from is a person of mixed race. And so I think that's in reference to the dark color of these peppers. So here we have the 7 Pot Dougla. This particular one you can see I picked a little early. It's still got some green on the bottom. But what I'm going to do is cut some of these open, collect the seeds, and the rest will be for drying. Now I'm going to do what every reasonable person should do when they're handling peppers of this Scoville. The active ingredient that gives pepper their heat is a chemical called capsaicin. And so to prevent that from getting on my fingers, I'm wearing gloves. And in abundance of caution, I'm gonna actually put on a little bit of a mask, and I'm gonna wear my glasses. Now I watched a few videos on the internet of people popping an entire pod into their mouth. It's worth a good laugh, but I wouldn't do it myself. I did, however, taste a few little slivers, and they're very, very hot. I tell people it's like putting a little piece of the sun on your tongue. So to dry out this plate of madness, I don't want to put it in the shed where I have my other herbs drying out. Some of those herbs I use to make soothing teas, and the oil is so pungent from this pepper that I just feel like it's going to contaminate and infiltrate everything in the shed. So what I'm going to do, I just put this in my drying racks out here, and I'll have to put the camera down. But basically I'm going to set it out here in the drying racks so that there's a breeze blowing over this stuff and eventually dry them out into flakes, which I'll use for a crazy pepper powder. But it's all cut up and ready to be dried. Throughout the summer I harvested a lot of great sweet peppers, but the hot peppers take longer to mature. So it was really during the fall that I got my harvest of the hot ones. These are guajillo peppers. They're not terribly hot, but they dry out to a beautiful red garnet color and are great to grind up and put them in beans and chili. This is the datil pepper, synonymous with St. Augustine, Florida. It's a fruity, spicy, enjoyable pepper to grow. And these are white Peruvian habanero, and it's a dwarf plant. I think it'd make a great choice for people who have balconies and want to grow in containers and still get some heat. On the same weld wire trellises where I grew cucumbers over the summer, I planted some peas, both shelling and sugar snap. I amended the ground with some of my own compost and then added some store-bought compost. And then my son helped me direct sow the seeds right into the ground. On October 16th, we finally got our first rain of the season. It had been a long, hot summer, and rain hadn't fallen since spring, literally about 6 months, so it was a very, very welcome time. Now I can tell you my goats Alice and Charlotte, they do not like the rain falling on their fur, but my garden, well, it just soaked it up, as did all the trees, the hills. The whole earth was happy for the rain. Now fortunately, we actually got some meaningful rainfall totals on this first rain of the season, something like 1/4 of an inch. And I really wanted to savor the moment, so I stayed outside, took out my guitar, and played a little bit while the rain fell around me. That first rain of the season is very cleansing. Of course, all the dust and soot that's been accumulating on trees gets washed away so the leaves can really collect the sunlight. The roadways are well known to be slick from all of the oils that have accumulated, so it's treacherous driving here in Southern California. And our roofs get washed clean from our homes, which is why we don't collect that rainwater. But I did put rain barrels at each of my roof's downspouts. My water district actually gave 2 rain barrels away free to each homeowner, and they even paid me $125 per rain barrel to hook them up. Imagine that. Now rainwater is wonderful because it doesn't contain chemicals like chlorine or fluoride, which are found in our tap water. So I use rainwater to water plants, irrigate, and it's really just great stuff. So last night we rolled the clocks back to standard time, and it feels like fall. It got brighter. Really? It got brighter earlier, but it's gonna get darker earlier. Excuse me. Anyways, I'm gonna harvest a little squash right now. Come check it out. So, some of the ways you can tell when your blue hubbard is ready to harvest is that this stem changes from a green color, where it's getting so much nutrients from the vine, to this kind of brownish, corky color. And then another indicator is that the color of the squash itself goes from a glossy green to this more matte green. So let's go ahead and harvest this squash. Nice. Now I like to do a little garden to table segment with each video, so come on into the kitchen and let me show you how I prepare a blue hubbard squash. The blue hubbard is a great keeper. It'll last all winter long because of its tough skin, but that means you gotta crack it open, and I use an axe for that job. The inside of the blue hubbard squash resembles that of a pumpkin, but the grain is smoother and it's a bit sweeter, so they make excellent pie fillings. I like to prepare mine in a minimalist fashion. I use an ice cream scoop to remove all the seeds, and I'll save some of those for future blue hubbard vines. Then I like to spread some olive oil all over the squash flesh. I bake the blue hubbard in the oven at about 375 degrees for about 30 or 40 minutes until the flesh is soft enough to stick a fork in. Then I take it out of the oven and use that ice cream scooper to scoop the flesh into a Pyrex tray. The skins are inedible and they end up back in my compost bins. But the flesh is delicious. I usually add cinnamon, nutmeg, and some good organic honey, and that's about it. Put it back in the oven and bake it till it's nice and soft and a golden brown. This particular batch I brought to our Thanksgiving dinner where everybody contributed to the meal. So it's time to start harvesting some of these pole beans, the Ojo de Cabra variety. We let them dry on the vine, and it'll probably take a couple of harvests. So I'm going to go ahead and pick the dry ones now. We'll come back and pick the rest of them on another 2 or 3 harvests. I really enjoy growing pole beans, especially the kind that you won't find in the supermarket. They taste delicious when you prepare them with homegrown garlic, onions, and hot pepper spices, and they're very hardy, resistant to diseases, so it's a very satisfying crop to grow. After the pods have been fully dried out in a nice dark space and then shelled, the dry beans of course last for a very long time, so they're great to enjoy throughout the winter months. So check out this unique aspect of this Ojo de Cabra strain. This is what a typical Ojo de Cabra bean looks like. Let me open this pod up for you and take a few out. And of course they're called Ojo de Cabra because they look like eye of the goat. But these pods, which are more slender, check out the beans that are in here. Look at these purple beans. Very different looking. Still Ojo de Cabra. And that's an indication that this is from the Tama Muhara strain, because they throw off these purple beans infrequently, but every now and then. Kind of a unique variety of Ojo de Cabra. In addition to the blue Hubbard squash, I also grew Big Mac's pumpkin, and I also grew patty pan squash and green zucchinis to round out my squash family crops. All right, friend, today is November 8th, and it's election day, so people are going to the polls, voting for a new president and all of our propositions and senators. I already voted. I did a mail-in ballot, so this morning I'm gonna plant garlic. I have 4 different varieties, and I'm planting from cloves that I saved from last year's crop. My biggest and my best cloves I've saved, or actually the bulbs I should say. I'll break the cloves out of the bulbs, and I'm gonna plant in this row. I laid down a bunch of compost, and I'm gonna turn it in a little bit and start planting these garlic cloves. Let's enjoy. Girls. Once I've laid down that first layer of compost, I like to use a garden hoe to break up the soil so the garlic cloves will have a loose area to grow in. I'll then use a heavy-duty rake to mix in the compost with the earth and flatten out the area for a smoother surface. Now I planted my 4 different varieties in 4 separate rows, each with between 24 and 26 cloves, so I have about 100 bulbs to look forward to when it's all mature. We put the cloves into the ground with the pointy side pointed up. Once every clove is in the ground, I'll use some flat tool, in this case a ruler, to cover them all up with the earth. Garlic is planted before the first frost or freeze, and it's kept over winter in the ground. So we put a thick layer of mulch or straw on top of where you've planted the garlic cloves, and the sprouts will begin to pop out through all that mulch. A little bit of life-giving water and a lot of patience, and soon I'll have plenty of garlic. It was late November when we got our first frost of the season. Certain crops like red romaine lettuce, kale, and mint do fine with some frost, and fortunately we don't get a layer of snow that sits on the ground here in Southern California, so I can grow certain crops all year. But other crops, well, once that frost comes, they're done. Such was the case with herbs like my holy basil or my peppers or my sweet potatoes. Once the frost comes, it's time to dig those sweet potatoes out of the ground. Now, we don't want the tubers to break when we're digging them out of the ground because they don't cure quite as well when they're broken. So it's kind of like an archaeological excavation to carefully remove them from the earth. This particular sweet potato plant was a volunteer. I must have missed a tuber last year when I was digging out my sweet potatoes. Once the sweet potatoes have been dug out of the ground, they need to cure or dry out. That's when they really get their sweet flavor. So I place mine in the predator-proof boxes where I also have my ojo de cabra pole beans drying out. I also got some Jersey yellow sweet potatoes, and these two were volunteers from tubers I must have missed last year. Now, I've talked about my homemade compost in almost every single video I've made because it's an important subject for a variety of reasons. In fact, I'm going to make a separate video just on compost, but I wanted to include a segment in my fall video because fall is a great time for making compost for one important reason, and that's the leaves that are abundantly available this time of year. I collect all the fall leaves that fall on my property, not just because my goats love to eat them, but because I know they're a source of clean, organic material that I can put back into my garden. So don't let this organic windfall go to waste. Like they say, the leaves in fall should be left where they fall. Pardon all the puns. You should add your organic vegetable and fruit scraps, coffee grounds, eggshells, all of that into the compost is great. Here I have piles of wood chips, the straw that I use for bedding in my goat's house, and horse manure because these are materials that are available to me. And my signature ingredient is seaweed, which I collect from clean beaches near me. It has different micronutrients that are available from land-based organic material, and it really puts the heat into the compost for decomposition. I mix all this material up, put it in my bins, and it basically cooks over a period of months as it breaks down into that nutritious black gold for the garden. I read a couple different books over the fall, and each was informative and inspiring in their own ways. But without a doubt, the most inspiring thing I did over the fall was I volunteered at 2 different farms in the Malibu area. The first spot I volunteered at is up in the hills and canyons, a gorgeous ranch where I worked in their garden beds, and there I learned a valuable lesson about rich soil and compost. In fact, I got to meet their compost guru the first day that I volunteered. They plant their gorgeous beds in a very rich biodynamic compost, which they sell for between $35 and $50 a bag. The second farm that I volunteered at in Malibu has a very long history in the community. It was owned for over 60 years by the same family and had the longest continuously operating farm stand in all of California. But it had changed hands in the last couple of years, and the new lessor of the property was converting it to Biodynamics, just like the first property that I had volunteered at. I was thrilled to have the opportunity to once again talk with and work with that same biodynamic expert, Farmer Jack. He's an amazing 80-something-year-old gentleman, full of energy and knowledge, and I appreciate all the insights that he shared with me. On one of my volunteer days, we spent hours loading logs to the front end loader of his tractor. And at the end of the day, I asked Jack how he stays in such great physical shape. His answer? Pace yourself. And I was also very grateful that after a patient lesson, they let me drive their tractors and till their fields in advance of some of the rains that were coming. It was without a doubt the highlight of my volunteering experiences thus far. So there you have it. Again, today is December 21st of 2016, and this was a review of the fall season here at my garden, RanchoReiso in Southern California. I hope you enjoyed this video, and I hope you watch some of my other videos. Take it easy, and be well, my friends.